Alright, hey you guys, just thought I'd talk about a couple things just to tie things up before the test tomorrow, what you're going to crush. Alright, so hey, I thought we'd talk about fiscal and monetary policy a little bit. Alright, remember that fiscal policy is taxing and spending. Alright, taxing and spending. And so we know that there's two kind of general theories of fiscal policy in which they attempt to make the economy grow at a rate in which we have, low unemployment and that kind of stuff. And high GDP, but not too high, right? So the first fiscal policy or type is, oh, and by the way, remember who's in charge of fiscal policy. The president will suggest a budget which is helped made by the OMB and all the other cabinets, right? And the independent executive agencies, the IRCs, the government corporations, etc. Congress has the power of the purse, right? So they will actually appropriate the money. And don't forget that there's going to be interest groups advocating or lobbying to get money spent that benefits their constituency and their interest groups, all right? Okay, so fiscal policy, there's supply side economics, which that's the theory that believes that if you cut taxes, the economy will grow. And the idea behind that is if you cut taxes, people, businesses have money in their pocket, and if they have money in their pocket, they're more willing to hire more people, which will stimulate the economy. They're more willing to, maybe buy or invest in capital in their business to grow the economy, that kind of thing. All right, the supply side economics is cutting taxes and as well as then cutting spending as well, right, to stimulate the economy. The other approach is the Keynesian approach, or deficit spending, and what that means is that the government will increase spending even if they have to get a deficit or go into debt for it. And the idea is if you spend money on infrastructure, on roads, on buildings, on bridges, etc., that employ people, then those people will get money in their pocket, and that money in their pocket, people will spend that on things they need, things they want, etc., and stimulate the economy. And the idea is that once the economy gets going, you cut spending so we don't have deficits, or we can pay back the deficit or the debt that we borrowed to stimulate the economy in the Keynesian approach. Right? So two things about fiscal policy. Taxing and spending, there's the Keynesian approach and the supply side approach. All right? Now, don't forget also that debt versus deficit. Right? The deficit is a yearly shortfall of money. So I think we looked at the this budget in 2013. They talked about $3.8 trillion to run the government. And I think that they thought that there would be something like a $1.6 trillion deficit, meaning they were short. And I think revenue was only 2.4. I think 2.4 trillion. And so they want to spend 3.6, but they only brought in 2.4. Therefore, there's a yearly deficit. All right, and the yearly deficits, when you add them all up from, all the way back to when the government started borrowing money to now, you get the national debt, which is somewhere around $16 trillion. All right. Also, one of the big indicators on how we measure whether or not the economy is growing is the gross domestic product, the GDP. All right. And again, I think what they want that growing is somewhere around 5% a year. So what that means is, if it goes above 5%, we're worried about the economy growing too quick and it could be inflation. If it grows under that, then we're, recessive, like recession could go into effect. So it's somewhere, you want to manipulate that so it's right around 5% and the economy is growing healthy. All right? All right. Now, this monetary policy is controlled by the Federal Reserve Board. The Federal Reserve Board is an independent regulatory commission, which I know you guys know. And the Federal Reserve controls interest rates, all right? Interest rates. And what they'll do is if they want the economy to grow, they want to put more money into the system. And the way they do that is they lower interest rates. And if you lower interest rates, people are more likely to borrow money. And if they're more likely to borrow money, they'll spend that on businesses, they'll spend that on homes, they'll spend that on college. And that will stimulate the economy through that spending. All right? If they feel the economy is growing too quick and we're worried about inflation, they will increase interest rates to try to cool the economy down because people are less likely to borrow money if it costs you a whole bunch of money to borrow money. All right? And so as you can see right now, interest rates are definitely at an all-time low because the Fed wants to stimulate economic growth as we crawl out of the Great Recession. All right? Now, also, the two types of taxes, right? We have progressive taxes and regressive taxes. The federal income tax, and I guess state income taxes, Nevada doesn't have one. There's your federalism. California does. The progressive tax, or the income tax, is the more you make, the more you'll pay. All right? So what that means is if you bump into tax brackets, where if you make more money, you bump into a higher tax bracket, and it's progressive in nature. The more you make, the more you pay. That's our income tax. All right? A regressive tax, like the payroll tax, which I know you guys see on your checks sometimes, is a regressive tax. And what a regressive tax means is the tax burden is felt more by those at lower incomes than those at higher incomes. All right? It's not, and so the payroll tax is a regressive-like tax. All right? Now remember, of our federal budget, when that budget pie, 100% of spending, that somewhere around 60%-ish of the budget is something called mandatory spending. And mandatory spending is that the government will spend that money year to year to year without revisiting it. All right? And so generally, the mandatory spending that we think of are a number of things. We have Medicare, which is health care for the elderly, Medicaid, which is health care for the poor. We have interest on the national debt. We have veterans benefits and Social Security. Those are some of the big kind of mandatory spending. And sometimes those are called entitlements, right? Or sacred cows, things that generally don't get touched because people paid into those. All right? Now remember that there's also, well, let's finish discretionary. So discretionary spending, about 30% of the budget, is budget that Congress, is the part of the budget pie that the Congress can choose maybe how to spend it each year. So where 60% of our budget goes to things automatically, about 30% gets shifted year to year to certain programs depending upon a variety of things. All right? So discretionary spending means they have choice whether to spend or not. Mandatory means it's generally appropriated by law and must be spent. All right? Now the other thing is means tested and non-means tested, right? So Medicare is a non-means tested program, which means people pay into through their payroll tax for Social Security and Medicare their whole lives. And the idea is that money goes in, your employer matches that a little bit, and that money then, when you get to a certain age, you can draw on Medicare and Social Security. And non-means tested means it doesn't matter how much you make. If you paid into it for your working life and you got so much in, then you get money back. Even if you're, Bill Gates and you're making billions of dollars a year, you still qualify for Social Security and Medicare. Now, a means-tested program is something in which your income level either allows you to qualify for the program or not qualify for the program. So for you guys, think about some of the scholarships that said you had to show economic need and your parents had to make, below a certain amount of money. That's a means-tested program. All right? Now, the scholarships that just said, they didn't care about your economic levels, they just cared about GPAs, those were non-means tested. All right? So Medicaid and welfare programs tend to be means tested, which means if you make below a certain amount of money, you qualify for certain programs. All right? Or a non-means tested means it doesn't matter how much money you make, you could qualify for that program if you paid into it. All right? Entitlements, mandatory, discretionary, progressive, regressive, debt, deficit. Fiscal and monetary policy. I guess the last thing is the Social Security Trust Fund. Remember that the payroll tax goes into that, and the idea was that workers would pay into the Social Security Trust Fund with the idea that when they were of a certain age, that money would come back to them. The reason that you're hearing about them being short money in the Social Security Trust Fund is the fact that, at one point we had something like 20 workers for every one retiree, so money was going in. Now we're somewhere, because of the baby boom, right? The baby boom, that demographic bubble, we have 2 workers, 3 workers for every one retiree. And what that means is there's more money coming out than going in. However, if that Social Security Trust Fund would have never been touched, there theoretically should have been a lot of money in there for the baby boom who's retiring right now. However, I think governments, Ds and Rs, have both gone into the trust fund to spend that on other things than just Social Security. And so when you get that demographic uptick with the baby boom, and the fact that politicians have kind of taken money out of the trust fund, it means we are short. All right? I think just a little quick public policy thing. That's why I reviewed that. Other than that, get some sleep tonight, kick some butt, and show up about 7:20 at the Commons. Get some bacon and things like that for Mr. Salter, and then go kick some butt and make Jimmy Madison proud. All right. See you guys tomorrow.